Eli was only 15, but life had already taught him lessons no child should ever have to learn. After running away from an abusive foster home 2 years ago, he'd been living on the streets, surviving day by day in a city that rarely noticed people like him. His clothes were worn thin, his shoes barely held together, and hunger was a constant companion. Yet despite everything, Eli hadn't let the world harden him completely. He still believed in kindness, even when it seemed like the world didn't care. Every night, Eli searched for shelter in alleys or under bridges, doing his best to stay warm during the cold winter months. Sometimes he shared scraps of food with other homeless kids he met along the way. "We're all just trying to survive," he'd tell himself whenever he gave away something he desperately needed. One particularly bitter evening, snowflakes swirled through the air as Eli trudged down a dimly lit street, clutching a tattered blanket around his shoulders. The wind cut through him like knives, and every step felt heavier than the last. As he turned into a narrow alley, hoping to find a quiet spot to rest, he heard it, a faint sound almost drowned out by the howling wind. At first, Eli thought it might be his imagination. But then it came again. Soft, muffled cries, barely audible over the storm. Following the sound, he moved deeper into the alley until he saw them. 2 tiny bundles nestled near a dumpster, their little faces pink from the cold. Babies, twins, wrapped in thin blankets but clearly abandoned, left there to fend for themselves in the freezing night. For a moment, Eli froze, unsure what to do. But then instinct kicked in. He couldn't leave them here, not like this. Wrapping his own blanket tighter around the twins, he scooped them up gently and started walking toward the nearest community center, praying they'd take them in before it was too late. Little did Eli know, this act of courage would change not only the babies' lives, but his own forever. The cries grew louder as Eli approached the twins, his heart pounding in his chest. Kneeling down, he carefully unwrapped the thin blankets to get a better look at them. Their tiny faces were flushed from the cold, and their lips had a faint bluish tint. One of the babies let out a weak whimper, its little hands trembling against the icy air. Eli's stomach churned with anger and sadness. How could anyone leave 2 innocent infants alone like this? But there was no time to dwell on it. Every second counted. Eli quickly wrapped the twins tighter in the blanket, tucking them close to his body to share what little warmth he had. His own teeth chattered as the wind whipped through the alley, but he didn't care. All that mattered now was keeping these babies alive. As he stood up, cradling the twins awkwardly but securely in his arms, Eli scanned the area for help. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional car speeding past without a glance. No one seemed to notice or care about what was happening here. Gritting his teeth against the biting cold, Eli started walking toward the community center a few blocks away. He'd been there before when volunteers handed out food and blankets during the winter months. If anyone could help, it would be them. The journey felt endless. Each step sent sharp jolts of pain through Eli's legs, which were already stiff from the freezing temperatures. The weight of the twins made every movement harder, but he refused to stop. "Hold on," he whispered softly to the babies, though he wasn't sure if they could hear him over their soft whimpers. "You're gonna be okay." When Eli finally reached the community center, relief washed over him. Warm light spilled out onto the snowy sidewalk, and the faint hum of voices inside gave him hope. Pushing open the door, he stumbled into the lobby, startling a volunteer who was organizing supplies. "Oh my goodness!" the woman exclaimed, rushing forward as soon as she saw the twins. "What happened?" "I found them in an alley," Eli panted, his voice hoarse from the cold. "They were left there. I think someone abandoned them." The volunteer immediately sprang into action, calling for others to bring blankets and warm bottles while she checked the baby's vitals. Another worker called the authorities, explaining the situation urgently. Within minutes, the twins were swaddled in fresh, warm blankets and placed near a space heater. They began to calm down, their cries softening into sleepy hiccups. Eli sank into a nearby chair, his limbs shaking not just from exhaustion but also from the emotional toll of everything that had just happened. A cup of hot chocolate appeared in front of him, offered by another volunteer. "You saved their lives," she said gently, her eyes filled with admiration. "We don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found them." Eli looked down at the steaming cup in his hands, unsure how to respond. He hadn't done anything heroic. He'd simply done what anyone should have done. But deep down, he felt a flicker of pride. For once, he'd made a difference. It wasn't long before police officers arrived, followed by paramedics who whisked the twins away to ensure they were healthy. As the commotion unfolded around him, Eli stayed quiet, watching as the pieces fell into place. Little did he know, the real story was only beginning. The police arrived at the community center within minutes, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow through the frosted windows. Officers quickly took charge of the situation, speaking with volunteers and gathering information about the twins. One officer approached Eli, his expression serious but kind. "You're the one who found them?" he asked, gesturing toward the ambulance where paramedics were checking the babies. Eli nodded, still clutching the now empty cup of hot chocolate. "Yeah, I heard them crying in an alley a few blocks away. They were just left there." His voice trailed off, unsure how to fully explain the scene he'd stumbled upon. The officer scribbled notes onto his notepad before asking more questions. Where exactly Eli had found the twins, whether he'd seen anyone nearby, and what condition they'd been in when he discovered them. Eli answered as best he could, though his mind kept drifting back to those tiny faces, pale and trembling from the cold. Even now, sitting safely inside the warm building, he couldn't shake the image of their vulnerability. As the investigation unfolded, news of the abandoned twins spread quickly. It didn't take long for authorities to identify the babies. They belonged to the Harrisons, one of the wealthiest families in the city. The kidnapping plot came to light almost immediately. A disgruntled former employee, furious over being fired months earlier, had orchestrated the entire scheme. He'd snatched the twins during a late-night outing with their nanny, demanding a massive ransom from the Harrisons in exchange for their safe return. Meanwhile, the Harrisons themselves were frantic. Sarah and Michael Harrison had spent hours pacing their mansion, clinging to each other while waiting for updates from the police. Their 2-week-old twins, Emma and Ethan, were their entire world, the joy that brought light into even the darkest corners of their privileged yet often stressful lives. When officers finally delivered the news that the babies had been found alive and safe, the couple broke down in tears of relief. Within the hour, Sarah and Michael raced to the hospital where the twins were taken for evaluation. As they entered the pediatric ward, their eyes scanned the room until they landed on the cribs holding their precious children. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she reached out to touch their tiny hands. "Oh, my babies," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We thought we'd lost you." A nurse explained that the twins were doing well, thanks in large part to the quick actions of the person who'd found them. "He saved their lives," the nurse said softly. "If he hadn't acted when he did." That's when the Harrisons learned about Eli, a homeless boy who'd risked his own safety to ensure theirs. They insisted on meeting him immediately. Back at the community center, Eli was surprised when a detective informed him that the twins' parents wanted to speak with him personally. "They're very grateful," the officer said, noticing Eli's hesitation. "Don't worry, you're not in any trouble. They just want to thank you." When Eli arrived at the hospital later that evening, escorted by the same detective, he felt completely out of place. The sterile hallways and polished floors were a stark contrast to the gritty alleys he called home. His worn clothes and unkempt hair drew curious glances from staff members, but he tried to ignore them, focusing instead on why he was here. Finally, he was led to a private waiting room where the Harrisons sat together, cradling their twins. At first glance, Eli could tell they were wealthy. His tailored suit, her diamond necklace, but their red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands revealed the depth of their fear and gratitude. "Eli," Michael began, standing up to greet him with an extended hand. "We can't thank you enough for what you've done." Sarah stepped forward next, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him tightly. "You saved our babies," she choked out. "We'll never be able to repay you." Eli shifted uncomfortably, and used to such attention. "I just did what anyone would have done," he mumbled, looking down at his scuffed shoes. But deep down, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have braved the freezing cold or risked their own safety for strangers. Still, he didn't feel like a hero, he'd simply followed his heart. The Harrisons pressed him to accept some form of reward, offering cash or gifts, but Eli politely declined. "I don't need anything," he said firmly. "I'm just glad they're okay." His humility struck a chord with the couple. In that moment, they realized Eli wasn't just a savior. He was someone special, someone worth investing in. And so, without hesitation, they decided to change his life too. The Harrisons couldn't stop thinking about Eli. Even after he'd politely declined their offers of money or gifts, his quiet humility and selflessness lingered in their minds. They saw something extraordinary in him, someone who had endured unimaginable hardships, yet still chose kindness over bitterness. It wasn't long before Sarah turned to Michael with a determined look. "We can't just let him walk away," she said firmly. "He saved our babies' lives. We owe him so much more than a reward. He deserves a chance." Michael nodded, equally moved. "You're right. He's been through things most people couldn't even imagine. If anyone deserves a fresh start, it's him." With that, they decided to take action. The next day, they arranged for Eli to meet them again, not at the hospital this time, but at their home. When Eli arrived, escorted by a social worker assigned to his case, he was overwhelmed by the sheer size of the mansion. Towering gates, manicured lawns, and gleaming chandeliers greeted him as he stepped inside. For someone used to surviving in alleys, the opulence was almost surreal. Sarah and Michael welcomed him warmly, guiding him to a cozy sitting room where tea and snacks were laid out. Despite their efforts to make him comfortable, Eli sat stiffly, unsure why he'd been invited back. Was this some kind of charity? Or worse, pity? "Eli," Sarah began gently, breaking the silence. "We've been talking about everything you've done for us, for our family, and we want to do something for you in return." Eli shook his head immediately. "I told you I don't need anything," he said, his voice firm but soft. "I didn't help your babies for a reward." "We know," Michael interjected, leaning forward earnestly. "And that's exactly why we're here. What you did, it's rare. You could have walked away, but you didn't. That says a lot about the kind of person you are. And we think someone like you deserves a real shot at life, a chance to build something better." Eli frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled warmly. "We want to help you turn things around, not just with money, but with support. A place to live, access to education, counseling if you need it. We want to give you the tools to create a future you deserve." For a moment, Eli was speechless. No one had ever offered him something like this before. Growing up in foster care and then on the streets, he'd learned not to trust easily. People always wanted something in return, or their promises faded once it became inconvenient. But looking into Sarah and Michael's eyes, he saw sincerity, a genuine desire to help without expecting anything in return. Still, doubt crept in. "Why would you do all this for me?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with skepticism. "You don't even know me." "Because you showed us what true humanity looks like," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You reminded us that no matter how hard life gets, there's still good in the world. And we believe in you, Eli. We think you're capable of amazing things." It took days of thought and several reassuring conversations with the Harrisons before Eli finally agreed to accept their offer. At first, adjusting to his new life felt overwhelming. Moving into a spacious guest room in the Harrisons' mansion, attending therapy sessions, and enrolling in school seemed like stepping into another universe. But slowly, he began to adapt. The Harrisons treated him like family, inviting him to meals, celebrating holidays together, and encouraging him every step of the way. For the first time in years, Eli felt safe. He poured himself into his studies, excelling academically despite the late start. Teachers praised his determination, and classmates admired his resilience. But perhaps the most profound change came within Eli himself. As he healed from the scars of his past, he discovered a passion for helping others. Inspired by the kindness shown to him, he started volunteering at shelters and mentoring other homeless youth. By the time he graduated high school, Eli had already begun advocating for programs aimed at supporting vulnerable communities. Through it all, the bond between Eli and the Harrisons only grew stronger. What started as gratitude evolved into a deep mutual respect, and eventually, love. They weren't just benefactors. They were his family now. Years passed, and Eli transformed in ways no one could have imagined. The once homeless boy who'd spent nights shivering in alleys was now a confident young man with a purpose. Thanks to the Harrisons' unwavering support, he graduated at the top of his class and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. But more than his academic achievements, it was his heart that truly set him apart. Eli never forgot where he came from. During college breaks, he returned to the shelters and community centers that had once helped him survive. He organized fundraisers, collected donations, and even started a mentorship program for homeless youth. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," he often said during talks at local schools or events. "But I also know how much difference one person can make. You don't have to be rich or powerful to change someone's life. You just have to care." His work didn't go unnoticed. News outlets began covering his story, highlighting not only his heroic act of saving the twins, but also his efforts to give back to the community. People were inspired by his resilience and compassion, and soon, Eli became a symbol of hope for countless others facing similar struggles. The Harrisons watched with pride as Eli flourished. They saw in him qualities they admired: strength, humility, and an unshakable commitment to making the world a better place. In many ways, Eli had changed them too. Before meeting him, their lives had revolved around wealth and status, but now they found joy in simpler things. Family dinners, volunteering together, and supporting causes close to Eli's heart. One evening, as they gathered around the fireplace to celebrate Eli's acceptance into a graduate program focused on social work, Sarah turned to him with tears in her eyes. "You've given us so much more than we gave you," she said softly. "You reminded us what really matters." Eli smiled, shaking his head. "No, you gave me everything," he replied. "A home, a future, a family. Without you, I wouldn't be here." It was true. Their lives were intertwined in ways neither side could have predicted. What had started as a chance encounter in a dark alley had blossomed into something extraordinary. A bond built on kindness, trust, and love. As Eli looked around the room at the people who had become his family, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life hadn't been easy, but it had taught him invaluable lessons about resilience, compassion, and second chances. And now, armed with those lessons, he was ready to keep giving back, to ensure that no child ever felt as alone as he once had. Because sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to spark a chain reaction. For Eli, that act had saved 2 babies and ultimately himself. Years later, Eli stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people, delivering a keynote speech at a national conference on youth advocacy. Behind him was a slideshow of his journey, from the alley where he'd found the twins to the university where he'd earned his degree, and finally, to the programs he'd built to support homeless children. His voice was steady but filled with emotion as he spoke about the power of compassion. "When I found those babies that night, I didn't think about rewards or recognition," Eli said, pausing to look out at the audience. "I just knew they deserved a chance, and so did I. That chance came through the kindness of strangers who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." He went on to thank the Harrisons, who sat beaming in the front row, their eyes glistening with pride. "They didn't just save me. They showed me what it means to truly care for someone else. And now, my mission is to pay that forward." As the crowd erupted into applause, Eli stepped off the stage and hugged Sarah and Michael tightly. In that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just Eli's victory. It was theirs too. Together, they had proven that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples of change, touching lives far beyond what anyone could imagine. In the end, Eli's story was a testament to the transformative power of empathy, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds forged by love and gratitude. It reminded everyone that no matter how dark the world might seem, there's always light waiting to shine through, even in the quietest corners of an alley.